The budget speech is proudly brought to you by Chartered Accountants South Africa. A CASA can help your business take off and rise above your tax headache. Find a CASA tax advisor in your area. Go to findacasa.co.za.
Welcome to this segment, which is going to be focusing on the socio-political aspects of the budget. I'm Nozi Pombanja, glad to be your host from here on. It was a tight balancing act for Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene's first full budget, with cuts to government frills and that long-awaited unpopular increases in taxes. To find out whether he hit the right notes with both the political and economic audiences, we're joined now by Konrad. He's head of Standard & Poor's South Africa, and he joins us from our Cape Town studios. And here in Johannesburg, I'm with Dumisani Hlophe, is the CEO of Kunjalo Center for Development Research, and Xhanti Payi, he's an economist with the Nascence Research Insights. Let's maybe get into it, Dumisani, and start off with you, because there's been a view that for the first time, the ANC-led government has had to deal with real revenue challenges. This is not about tweaking the frills. This is no longer about playing at the margins. Do you think that this particular budget lived up to that expectation?
Look, it was, good evening. I think it was a very challenging balancing act to go through. Let's keep in mind that in the build-up to the budget speech, I think there was a serious worry by society in terms of, there's quite a whole lot of challenges that are going on. And I think the biggest fear was in terms of the taxes, how far will they go up? But I think from where I'm sitting, the fact that he did not touch the VAT, perhaps it's a credit.
Would you say that's a politically motivated decision? Everybody, when they look at VAT and the impact that it has on the broad masses, and not just whether we're looking at the elite or the super wealthy, would say, well, politically, you don't want to touch VAT.
Look, I think it's two things. Number one, I don't think we're in a society where we have begun to vote according to the taxes that we pay. If that was the issue, I think the way we vote in this country, the middle class, it would have drastically changed. It was important for the ANC for the ANC government that we do take the interests of society quite seriously and not touch the VAT. But then also there's a local government election coming up next year. But it also means that we are beginning to have an ANC government that is beginning to listen to a significant number of people in the society, either because there's an alternative political party that is emerging, or alternatively, they see the value of doing what is proper for society. So I think for me, they wouldn't have touched it. But I don't think, in terms of the political economy, they have internalized or strategized on how to deal with the middle class. Because if you look at the raises, in terms of the taxes, it will eat into the pockets of the middle class, directly and indirectly. Directly because the personal income tax has gone up, but indirectly because things like fuel and other issues have also gone up.
I'll come back to the middle class, because there is a bit of contention in terms of the fight for voters in that particular segment and how this budget fits into that broader debate. Xhanti, let's come to you. The balance between the broader audience, particularly I'm thinking about the tripartite alliance, I'm thinking about the unions. I didn't pick up any mention of a minimum wage, youth wage subsidy, or anything of that note. How do you think the unions might have reacted to Nene's budget?
Look, he did go into some of the important issues. One of the things that he said he wanted to see sorted out was the labor environment. So he actually used that word a number of times, which was quite encouraging. Obviously, there are other instruments such as the Jobs Fund, which they've increased, some of the support they want to give to workers, and certainly and also some of the low-income earners would not be as badly affected in terms of the tax increases. So he tried to sort of walk that path, but as you say, he was very careful not to touch VAT. That would have been quite
I'm going
serious.
to come back to that labor relations aspect of it, and in particular in the context of the public sector wage and the kind of increases that are likely likely to come through. But before we do that, let's go to Cape Town. Let's bring Konrad into the conversation. No doubt, Konrad, the rating agencies also listening very closely to what Minister Nene was delivering today. What sense do you get walking away from this particular speech? Do you think that rating agencies like yourself have been pacified with this delivery?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, and good evening to you. My first reaction certainly was this was a very measured approach. This was a very measured budget. There weren't any of sort of the big measures that some had expected. VAT, for instance, was already mentioned. But from a rating agency's perspective, and the way I would see this is, it was a measured approach, but it clearly now puts the risk really on the implementation side. Certainly by not touching some of the big tax items, the National Treasury certainly hasn't given itself a lot of room for error, a lot of room for maneuver. And that's why I'm saying really, in the context, and the Minister a number of times was referring to the challenging economic situation, the economic headwinds they are facing. Certainly in that situation now, the focus really has to be on the implementation risk. And when it comes to the expenditure side, the main implementation risk is around public sector wages and the upcoming public sector wage negotiations.
Let's get into those negotiations, because we understand that there was some degree of communication between National Treasury and the municipalities to the extent that there was a suggestion that whatever increase comes through should be capped at 5.8%. This is, of course, against the backdrop of 15%. That seems to be the likelihood of what the request is going to be. Should government cave into those requests, and we do see the approval of a 15% wage hike or thereabout? Talk to us about the kind of impact that has on South Africa's ratings, not necessarily from S&P, but broadly amongst the rating agencies.
15% certainly sounds like a very extreme opening position as far as the bargaining is concerned. From our perspective, as I said earlier, we don't see a lot of room for maneuver on the fiscal side. We obviously now for some time we have seen fiscal targets to some degree slipping. Fiscal consolidation has become a bit of a moving target. We have seen for a number of years now the debt burden rising, and I think what is important from our perspective is that the National Treasury or government, that they continue adhering to their expenditure ceilings and their fiscal consolidation targets. And certainly that was a commitment that was made clear today. For all practical purposes, the first sentence of the budget speech today referred to fiscal consolidation and basically achieving a sustainable debt burden over the medium term. So government, the National Treasury certainly today reaffirmed its commitment to fiscal consolidation, reaffirmed its commitment to the expenditure ceilings, or even tighter expenditure ceilings than we previously had. And that means there is very little room for maneuver with regards to these public sector wage agreements as well. And inflation is coming down. I think that is a positive. And again, in the context of a 15% sort of wage demand, it would be very difficult to see how that can be accommodated in the current budget framework.
Dumisani, I want us to go back to that middle class that you had alluded to right at the beginning, and talk about the strategy that the ANC-led government has or doesn't have in this particular regard. How does this particular speech take away or reinforce the ANC's position in attracting and getting a hold of that vote?
Look, like I said earlier on, I think we are still in a society where we decide to vote for many other reasons other than based on the taxes that we pay. I have seen at some stages in London, for example, in the UK, there were never taxes that are raised during an election year because people in their open consciousness, they do decide to vote based on what they, how much they lose to the state. In the South African case, I think the middle class, it still votes the ANC because of the tradition, where they grew up and how they were politicized and basically their political orientation. So the ANC can still afford it to get away, with raising taxes. the fuel prices and every time they're going up and stuff like that. But also the other issues that the majority, I think Xhanti will agree, the majority of the middle class, they don't vote. Come the election day, they are buying, they are going to the malls. If they go to the voting polls and there are too many people, they just go back.
So you're saying the active participants really are still below the middle class that are determining the direction of the country in terms of a political direction?
Look, the clever blacks, we make noises in the opinion spaces, but in terms of real political activism, inside political parties, that's a very limited number.
Let me throw your question to the clever black next to me, and let's see if this clever black is going to pick up on this. Let's talk about how he's addressed parastatals, and in particular, I'm talking about Eskom and SAA. We heard that there wasn't any additional funding coming to Eskom, but the plan that was introduced last year was going to be carried through. SAA still working we are in the 9th turnaround strategy. Your sense about how we dealt with those two very, very hot SOEs in the country?
Look, I think I like the language he used when he talked about Eskom, really underlining who really gets affected. So he really went into small businesses, and we know that that's where it hurts the most. People who are in the townships who run perhaps a butchery, that you can't service a butchery without power, and those are the people who are hardest hit. Much more than the people who know how to obviously buy, who can afford to buy their expensive generators. So he did, use the language that was quite strong, that we can't grow this economy, we can't develop employment unless we actually deal with the power sector. And he actually, spent a little bit of time in that. And some of the measures he mentions are, in short term and long term. But certainly, as I agree with Konrad, much of this stuff is about how you actually go forward and implement it. And I think this is the thing. Remember, the government came out late last year when the problems were coming out strongly. They said, we've got a 5-point plan, and these are the various things that we're going to do. We haven't heard much of an update from that. So the State of the Nation didn't bring it up, and he didn't actually also detail it in any measure except to say we are putting 32 billion, which we also know is actually probably not enough, given what Eskom itself has been saying is the kind of money they need.
Konrad, perhaps of less importance to you would be the Post Office and South African Airways, but no doubt Eskom top of mind. What do you walk away with from the way that the Eskom issue was dealt with in the speech?
Eskom certainly is an important topic for us. You will remember that we had Eskom's BBB- rating last year for some time on Credit Watch negative. When the government tabled the rescue package, if you like, late last year for Eskom, we resolved the Credit Watch situation. We affirmed the rating for Eskom at BBB-, but we left a negative outlook on Eskom's rating, unlike the outlook we have for the government itself, which is a stable one at the moment. So Eskom is certainly an issue for us. And we have some comfort in the government's package that was presented for Eskom. But with the negative outlook we have on the rating, we also we are expressing some concern again around implementation risk with regards to delivering the package in a way that really all the pieces come together. And we have some concerns with regards to overall operational risks around Eskom and its financial position. When you look at the budget speech today, the minister spoke about the unsatisfactory financial position of some parastatals, and certainly in that context he must have thought about Eskom as well. He held out the prospect of future tariff increases for Eskom. I took note of the fact that he also mentioned that Eskom in its conversations or in its negotiations with the regulator should move towards a more cost-covering tariff regime. I mean, if all that happens, including the rescue package, that certainly from our perspective would put Eskom on a much more solid footing as far as its creditworthiness and as far as its financial position is concerned.
Let's dig a little bit deep into the tariff issue, Dumisani, if we will. We have on the one hand NERSA, which seems to be catering to a political mandate, very conservative when it comes to the kind of tariff increases that they are allowing Eskom to push through. Do you think that that particular push and pull relationship is going to be overcome as we now push ahead with a cost coverage that Konrad mentions now?
Look, for me, I think the bigger issue here it's state planning and performance. If you look into all these parastatals that we're talking about, I mean, these are government-owned business entities. We are talking about ESCOM, SAA, the post office, and the question is, why are they not performing? And part of my, reflection on that is that in most cases we don't attribute, the responsibility to the political leadership, and any kind of, growth in society. They will tell you that if you are going to have a very powerful political leadership, then you are going to have a government that performs. And in most cases, we tend to attribute the blame on the bureaucrats, on the top bureaucrats, and they remove the responsibility of leadership from the political leadership. And a part of that problem is the lack of long-term planning. Because at the political level, we are facing a situation where the ruling party is, the politics are more concerned about your 5-year regime change, who's coming in or out. Or when
But is that a South Africa, that's a unique situation to South Africa? Wouldn't all young democracies still be tied with this 5-year framework of who's coming into power? And within that, the cabinet reshuffles that we get when we seem to be hitting a brick wall?
Look, the good thing about South Africa is that is the last country to be independent in the African continent, so which means it should have learned and gained the experience from many other African countries. Many of the liberation heroes that are currently in government, they were actually in exile. So they have seen all over the world. They should have gained enough experience and reflected on that. And if you look at China, the reason why, among other things, that China is growing consistently is because when they look at the political leadership of state performance, they've got a very, very long term, and they are very, very consistent in terms of the management of the succession planning there. And in this country, we have not, we have not reached that. So it's quite an indictment on the political leadership when all the, the state-owned enterprises are not necessarily performing. I mean, with SAA, how many turnaround strategies, within a very short space of time?
I want to jump in there, and I want to maybe add fuel to fire in what you're saying. We have a National Planning Commission. We have a minister within the presidency. Before without portfolio, and now we're having a youth portfolio and a women's portfolio, but there's still that central understanding that there's some degree of planning that happens there. And we have a Ministry of Public Enterprises. Could the problem be the very fact that we have multiple entities who should be dealing with one problem?
Or the issue could also be elsewhere. Chinua Achebe says when the center doesn't hold, the things fall apart. So if the things are not holding at the ruling party level, those that are deployed in government are not likely to perform. So you need to strengthen the capacity of the ruling party to plan and they hold accountable the people they deploy over a long-term period.
I want to move on from this, but I have to ask you this question. If you could choose whose head is supposed to roll to move this state machinery forward or this political machinery forward, whose head should roll?
I wouldn't do that.
I thought that he was going to be a clever black and give us an answer, but maybe let's quickly move on from that. Hlophe, I want us to look at how the minister actually divided the pie in terms of social delivery. We saw education taking center stage. What I'm concerned about, and I'll get to health and the other issues, what I'm concerned about with education, the level of detail for me is one thing, but what he's detailing is actually a bit troublesome. 2 books per learner, and then there's teacher training and there's infrastructure as well. A month, 6 weeks ago, we were talking about paperless classrooms and going online. Are we speaking to each other? Do you get a sense from the speech that although we're putting education at the forefront, we are on the same page about what we want to do with education?
I think the main problem with education is long-term planning and actually just deciding what it is we want to take out of our education system. So one of the things that has been very big, for example, at the higher education level, to say we want artisans, and then somebody else says, no, but we need engineers, and then we need doctors. So that we say, what is our education system supposed to deliver? And as we design and implement, for example, the syllabus and everything else, we have that end in mind. And I think when we discuss, for example, pass rates, what are they delivering? What are we trying to get at? These budgets have been quite big for quite some time, so it's not a new thing that we dedicate as much as we do on education. We're probably at the top 10, if not top 5, spenders on education in the world. So we're doing very well in terms of being able to allocate money into education. Where there has been a problem is obviously how we implement that and getting the kind of outcomes that we need. Part of the problem there is exactly these issues about capacity. One of the things that he said was also, I thought was quite interesting, which clearly government is going to use, is a centralizing of procurement.
Yes.
That's always, obviously there's always this big tension between centralizing and actually decentralizing and allowing departments.
Do you think
this
is a step backwards, centralizing procurement, where you have now this one body that's going to be overseeing every single tender that is applied for and that it gets approved?
Exactly, and how long that might take in order to actually fix the problems. Perhaps it allows you to fix problems quicker, but at the same time it might actually allow you to take more and more to actually be able to actually snub into the real problems.
Before we go to Cape Town, a quick one from you, Dumisani.
Look, it's also that, I think for me it's all the thinking. The thinking that if she's not performing in that role, then we must take her responsibilities to the center. The question is, if supply chain across provinces and municipalities is not performing according to the law, why take the powers instead of making sure that they perform accordingly? So centralizing things that they will not necessarily work. It's going to take a very, very long time for things to happen. I think they should just build capacity where the fault lines are.
Konrad, to what extent are rating agencies actually following service delivery developments in a particular country? What do you take away from seeing how the purse has been divided in terms of a public service delivery component?
Certainly from a rating agency perspective, service delivery is important because this is about how government spends its money. But in many ways, when you talk about it in the South African context now, you're touching on some of the broader issues around really structural reform, about development, and ultimately also you're talking about sort of the lackluster growth in South Africa's economy. And those are certainly very important topics for us, because ultimately, and when you look at the fact that over the last 2 years, we had 2 downgrades for South Africa. The rating had peaked out in 2012 at BBB+ for us at Standard & Poor's. We had a downgrade in October 2012 to BBB, and then last year in June we downgraded to BBB- with a stable outlook now, as I said earlier. And that really was one of the main drivers really for these downgrades, were the lackluster growth in the South African economy, were the social issues, the developmental issues, and the impact all of that had obviously on the fiscal position and debt dynamics for the government. So dealing with these issues, whether it is, as you discussed earlier with the co-panelists, with regards to education, whether it is with regards to the parastatals, I think it is very important for us, because we know that we cannot face a situation where this lackluster growth continues forever, and be mindful of the fact that, again, the National Treasury today, or the Minister, actually pruned back the growth forecast for this year again to 2%, probably very much in recognition of the fact that load shedding is causing a lot of damage to the South African economy. So dealing with implementation of structural reform, whether it's in the context of a national development plan or whether it's in the context of the priority areas that were identified by the President in the State of the Nation address, I think this is very important for us from a ratings perspective as well.
On that note of social and development indicators being quite important for rating agencies, in addition to the other more traditional issues, let's take a short break. When we come back, we dig a little bit deeper into the National Budget 2015. Don't go away. Still in discussion with me, Konrad, head of Standard & Poor's South Africa, Dumisani Hlophe, CEO of Kunjalo Center for Development Research, and Xhanti Payi, economist at Nascence Research Insights. Let's go back to Cape Town. Konrad, we've been seeing a democratic dance, if I may call it that, in South Africa since the State of the Nation a week and a half or so ago. And now today we hear from the opposition in terms of their reaction to this particular budget. To what extent are we seeing a strengthening of the democratic process in South Africa, and does that bolster the investment case for the country?
See, from our perspective, when we look at South Africa, Again, when it comes to sort of broader issues like, for instance, political risk, political stability, these are still sort of aspects of the credit story or rating story where we have a solid underpinning in the South African context. We think South Africa has strong institutions, and we think there is also now, to come back perhaps a bit more to the budget today and the fiscal policy stance, there is a strong commitment among policymakers to overall sort of sustainable policies, and the budget today, again, when you look at it from my perspective, it was certainly a step on this road to continued sustainability and fiscal consolidation. Maybe not a giant step, if you like, but certainly a small step on that road in the context of quite obviously difficult sort of external conditions and a lot of economic headwinds.
Interesting insights there from almost an outside point of view looking in, but let's maybe take a quick look from the inside. Let's talk e-tolls for a moment, because I know there was a very clear reinforcement, a recommitment to the tolling system, and that users will have to pay for the e-tolls. Your sense of whether, again, this was another message that the minister got right?
Yes, I think from, I almost say from where I'm sitting, from where I'm driving, I think this is a huge political plus for the Gauteng ANC. Because if you read what he said, what the minister said is that clearly the tariffs are going to be lower. So people are going, it's not like you won't pay for the tolls. People will pay, but it will be far much lower and possibly with a better payment system. So if you look at the initiative by the ANC, so they can claim politically that, look, they listened to the outcry of the people in Gauteng, and the ANC is a highly democratic government, and they've given in terms of what the people are saying.
Do you think consumers were silly to pin their hopes on the idea that with the Gauteng review panel and all the work that the Premier put in, that there was a little bit of hope that we would get away with not paying e-tolls at all?
Look, yeah, and I think that was far-fetched, because if you look at the infrastructure, someone must pay for the infrastructure. It's a question of how to pay for that. The current system is a painful one, and if some of us did research on it, it's actually charging the poor than the people who have the money, who live in Senting and easily move around. So I mean, I'm sure the ANC in Gauteng will be very happy with this commitment. And also the fact that it is now a project which is led by the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, it also means that politically, as minute as the ANC in Gauteng it has been able to punch above its weight and got the national government to rethink, the payment of the e-toll. So it's a win-win situation for the government and also for the consumer.
I don't know if we can still apply win-win when it comes to that electricity tariff that the minister managed to sneak into consumers. Your thoughts on that?
Look, I mean, I think that it depends who notices. I mean, it's much like the debate they will have later on in the couple of months coming in terms of labor, because that we've been doing some research on that. It doesn't look like the minister. I mean, we've seen obviously development already in terms of what's going on at the municipal level. We saw what happened just before the president delivered a State of the Nation address, where people are saying we're going on strike. And we think that we can get away with 5.5, I mean, with such as 6% even is not there. We're probably getting to 9%, which means that they miss this completely, which is something that we're dealing with at Nascence, which has been actually telling people about. But one of the interesting things is when he talks about, for example, the levy that he's going to increase from 3.5 cents to 5.5 cents per kilowatt of an hour, and that it will fall away when we've gone past the crisis. I mean, we don't know how long this crisis is going to be. Eskom is struggling to tell us how far this thing will be. So we could actually be here in terms of these extra taxes. South African tax environment is actually quite harsh, given that we pay taxes across the board, right? When you park your car, you pay a tax. When you leave, when you drive on the road, everything else. So we certainly pay a lot of taxes, and these keep creeping up on us quite significantly.
Well, what we've managed to do in this 45 minutes is at least scratch the surface of some of the political implications that came out of Budget 2015. A very big thank you to my guest, Konrad, Head of Standard & Poor's South Africa, Dumisani Hlophe, CEO of Kunjalo Center for Development Research, and Xhanti Payi, economist at Nascence Research Institute. insights. And of course, the good news there being that there seemed to be no market reaction on the currency front as well as on the Aussie. And of course, Dumisho Greater giving us that picture just as we started off this segment. Do stay with CNBC Africa, because after the break, I will be joined by Lindsay Williams, and we're going to be taking a closer look at the market reaction to the budget. Don't go away.